All right, and welcome to another episode of B&B Financially Free. I am coming off of a hiatus over the summer, and I could not think of a better person to kick us back off than our guest today, Natalie Palmer. Natalie, how are you?
I'm good, Chantal. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you today. And for those of you who might not know Natalie Palmer, she has so many cool things going on. She has an amazing podcast geared towards short-term rental hosts called the No Vacancy Podcast. She has the best short-term rental event geared towards women called Level Up Your Listing. And then she has a lot of great courses, one called Host Like a Mother, which I think is edgy and really cool, teaching you everything that you need to know about being a host and being a co-host. And so, Natalie, I would just love to dive into your story. Like, what got you into this space?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me, Chantal. It's so great to chat with you. A little bit about my background. How I got into hosting was my parents had a second home in Big Bear, California. I'm based in Orange County, SoCal area. And they just bought it as a second home. My dad was an avid skier growing up, and that was it. And we never had it as like an investment or rental property on our mind. When my parents bought it, I was like 12 or something. After about 10 years, when, my sister and I had grown up and we just weren't going there anymore, I was like, hey, could we try throwing this on Airbnb? I had no idea what I was doing, but I convinced my parents to try out a co-hosting model with me. I didn't even know what co-hosting was, but I was like, give me a percentage. I want to manage it. There's this cool app, Airbnb. Like, I can do this. And this was me trying to escape corporate America and, just side hustle my way into different things. So we ended up, they were on board. I mean, I had to convince them a little bit. This was like their second home, and they were like, what? We're going to have strangers sleep here? I don't think so. But once I got them on board in the first winter season, because it's a ski resort town, we made enough money that my parents were like, let's go all in. We're taking everything that we just made and putting that as a down payment on a second home, and we want you to manage that one too. So that's really how it started. And then while we were renovating the second one, still operating the first one, I had neighbors start approaching me, and they were like, hey, we see that your first place is booked all the time. I've been trying to self-manage mine, or I'm using this property manager and I'm just not getting booked. You have constant traffic going in and out. Would you be willing to manage for me? So that's really how it took off. And then I was co-hosting for about 4 years before my husband and I finally bought our property in the same area. So co-hosting is kind of my background with everything. But I'm very passionate about owning real estate now, and we can get into all of that, the pros and cons of co-hosting and everything. But kind of once my hosting career sort of took off, I sort of pivoted that. I became an Airbnb ambassador, so I consult with a lot of brand new hosts on how to set up their listings. I started my podcast, No Vacancy, the podcast, and I'm the co-founder of Level Up Your Listing Women's Summit, like Chantal already mentioned, and that's every year in Scottsdale. So I've gotten really engaged on the content creation side and supporting hosts outside of just my own management portfolio.
Yeah, I love all that you're doing in this space, in particular with Level Up Your Listing too, because it's so geared towards women. And, this is not something that I've talked a lot about on the podcast, but a lot of our clients who are buying homes and becoming co-hosts and becoming hosts are women. And I don't know. Why do you think that women are gravitating to this space?
I love this question. I actually have some fun stats on this. So Airbnb says that I believe 65% of all of their hosts are female, and it's something like 75% of all bookings on the platform are made by a woman. And it's crazy because I think that people have really thought of real estate as a male-dominated industry, which it has been until short-term rentals. I think that this was kind of the first time that women were like, wait, I can put hosting and hospitality and creating an experience and everything I've scrolled on Pinterest and binged on HGTV, I can actually put that to a property. Because I'm sorry, I don't care how profitable it was. Nobody was ever going to get me interested in multifamily developments and owning apartment complexes or whatever, wholesaling. I will never, ever care about that. I would never want to be a long-term landlord. That's just not what excites me. So I think that finally women kind of came into this space and it was okay, we're the ones booking the places. even when men book my places, they always say, hey, my wife told me to reserve this one. She loved it. So we run this whole industry, and my partner for Level Up Your Listing, Tatiana, she's based in Vancouver. Her and I had attended a couple short-term rental conferences together that were male dominated, and we learned a lot, but we kind of felt like, hey, if we're really like the brains behind this entire industry, why is there not a space or a conference for women that are the majority of hosts and the majority of bookings?
Yeah, I see that so much too. And like our most successful hosts are gearing their properties towards women. Like even my male clients who are like buying properties and launching them, we're always like, you must hire a designer. Like you must hire a designer and you must like listen to them and work closely with them. And like they are gearing their listings towards women because women are making so much of the purchase decisions. And like I love that what you're saying is exactly how I felt and how so many of my customers feel too. They're like, there's just something about, buying a multifamily property that like just isn't exciting to me. And I think that it's so unique to allow like your passion as well as your investments align, because then you feel like so much more purposeful in it. So I love that that's your focus too.
I think it's also fun that with this industry, a lot of hosts are their own customers. Like they're their own ideal customers. So when you're designing the places, it's like, what would I book? Whereas I think that traditionally real estate has been like, okay, I have to do all this research. Like, is this an area going up with job growth and wage growth? And there's a lot of metrics you have to look at. There's kind of a barrier to entry. And with Airbnb, don't get me wrong, you still have to do your research and make sure that the place has the right regulation and everything. But ultimately, like when you find the deal and you start decorating it, you can really just pick things you like. Because if you do, chances are other people are going to like it and book it too.
I so agree with that. And like you're disproportionately rewarded for having a pretty property. And it's so funny to think about, sometimes people are like, oh, like what's the return on investment if I have like, a fifth unit versus 4? And we're like, what's the return on investment on this wallpaper? And it's like, there literally is. It's so crazy.
To my husband, he's like, I'm sorry, why do we need to spend, $22 per square foot on this backsplash tile when there's a $3.99 option at Lowe's? And I'm like, return on investment. Okay. Like, come on, get with it.
It's hard to measure. Yeah. We always say Airbnb is an art, not just a science. So yeah.
Very true.
And then that. As far as, you getting started in co-hosting, so that's like kind of a big deal that like you started with your family's properties, but then you started being approached by other customers. Were you working full time at this point? Like, had you left your corporate job? Was it like difficult for you to like step into this role from like working with your family into working with now like paying customers in the area?
So I graduated in 2015 from Cal State Fullerton with a business marketing degree. And I worked for, I want to say 2 years post-college. I was at doing marketing for an insurance company, like not that fun. And then when I left that, I was just so fed up with cubicle life and everything. And I literally just started side hustling like anything I could. I started doing like freelance wedding coordination for people, freelance like branding, freelance website design, freelance social media, like anything that I was like, somebody might pay me for this. Like I would do it. There was no strategy. I was just trying to like figure out how to pay monthly bills and save up enough to move out of my parents' house. And that was basically it. And then this is kind of the thing that stuck. So when I started the Airbnbs and that just took off, right. And then my parents reinvested and were like, okay, manage this one too. Because I had just been like doing random crap, honestly, it was so easy to be like, okay, forget those. I like kind of slowly offboarded like the social media clients and the branding clients I had, stopped taking weddings and like went all in on short-term rentals, which definitely paid off.
And how was it managing? Because you were managing from afar, right? At this point, like, was it difficult for you? Like, did you feel like you knew the area? Did you feel like you had contacts? Like, how did you build up your team out there?
I will say, I think today it's not hard to manage from afar. Like we have Zoom, we're recording this and you're 3 states away from me. You can text people, you can pick up the phone. It's not hard to build a team from afar. And, at the beginning, like we did have to go up and do multiple like restocking trips and stuff. I wasn't sure how many supplies to put in the listing and, how to decorate it. I should have been more diligent at the beginning with like creating a house manual, because people would text me asking questions like, how do I turn on the dishwasher? And I was like, I don't remember what model of dishwasher we have. So there are things that I've learned to do better. But I today 100% believe it is actually easier to manage from afar than a place local to you, because locally I've seen way too many hosts that have an Airbnb 15 to 30 minutes away from them. And if something happens, a guest complains, they drop everything to just go drive there and whatever, change the batteries in the smoke alarm or restock trash bags for them. They'll come and do anything. And when you when you manage from afar, you do not have that luxury. It kind of forces you to put these different things in place. So instead of being available to go change the smoke alarm batteries if my guest complains, instead, we're buying the 10-year long smoke alarms where the batteries don't die and start beeping. So it's like, you have to think one step ahead on those things, but then it makes it so much easier. It's something I never have to worry about now. Or having a really detailed house manual, or giving, I don't know, making sure that you have a backup lock so you're never the one running over if the smart lock battery dies and now you have to get them in. Like, thinking through the fact that you're not going to be there, it takes a little bit more setup at the beginning, but after that, I think that's what makes it actually passive income.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's so easy to get into that trap of like, oh, I'll just run over and go and do it. And really, you don't realize how much you're hurting your business and like
Yes.
what a poor
Yes.
return on your time like that actually is, especially if you're in a season where you're like, I want to grow this co-hosting business, or I want to buy multiple properties. Like, now you're reminding yourself how much like you have to drop everything and show up, which is not the reason why anybody would get started in this. What are some of the tools that you heavily rely on for your out of state investments? Like, what are some things that you just like cannot live without managing from afar?
Are we talking like software, like tools like that, or actual like the hardware, like things in the listing?
I was actually talking hardware, but we could get into both, honestly.
So hardware wise, the smart lock for sure. You absolutely need that with an actual physical lockbox with a backup key in it in case the batteries die. The smoke detectors, I'm not talking smoke alarm. The ones that tell you if like people have been smoking in the property, those are really good. The smoke sensors, noise monitors are good. A Ring camera, you're gonna want that. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Uh, like fast, reliable Wi-Fi is good, with like good instructions just on how to reset the Wi-Fi since you're not there. If people don't know how to reset the router, especially my property's in the mountains, so there's outages all the time. And one more good one I can recommend is it's called a water recirculating pump. If you do have properties in the mountains, you absolutely want to get this. Instead of having your guests have to turn on and shut off the water coming and going to prevent frozen pipes, a water recirculating pump, you install this and it basically just starts to run. It uses barely any electricity. It's not going to like drive up your electric bill, but it just kind of runs the water through the pipes at a constant sort of flow, so that you're not going to get these like frozen cold patches in there. So just thinking through like, what would I do if a guest forgot to shut off the water leaving? Also, it's not my guest's job to be shutting the water on and off. Like, they should be able to show up and leave and have everything smooth. So water recirculating pumps are really great if you're anywhere where you could get a frozen pipe.
Oh, I love the idea of that because I have properties in the mountains and I typically just like send a handyman out there and I could be automating this. So that's good to know.
Yes. Yeah. Just put one of those in. It's like a one time, you'll probably pay a plumber. My dad put them in. If you're not handy, you'll probably pay a plumber like $100 to install it. And then throw some heat tape just to be extra sure, but you will never have a frozen pipe if you do that.
Ooh, that's really, really good insight. I was just listening on my way over to record with you to your podcast that you did with the comedian that went to like Tiffany's or something. And he was just like talking about his experience there. So yeah, you guys should definitely go and check out this. Who was it with? What was his name?
It was, so I didn't interview him, but it was, if anyone knows Tim Dillon, the comedian, he had this whole like bit on his show talking about how horrible retail experiences are. And as he was describing this, I was like, oh, I feel so called out. Like, so much of what he's saying, I think hosts are doing a really shitty job of right now. So I just kind of spliced up that episode and reacted to it. That was a fun one.
That was a really fun episode. And I just want to, like, what you were saying about, not asking your guests to like go out and like, putting the liability on them to like turn on or turn off the water. I see this happen so much. And I know that you were talking about this as well, where like hosts get really kind of nasty with their guests. Like they treat them like, you're so lucky to be like staying here, and like this is my home, and here are all of your chores, and here are the things that I need you to do. Like, talk to me a little bit about like what you would suggest for hosts to have as like a mindset when they're hosting new guests that are paying.
I mean, you have to realize the moment you put it up on Airbnb or wherever you're going to host it, the moment you let guests in, it is not your house anymore. Like it's a business now. And I mean, you just have to accept, like, there are people I've talked to who are like, I don't know, do you think that like couples are having sex in my listing? Yes. Duh. Like, yes. Like, if that makes you uncomfortable, I don't think you should be in this business. I don't know what to tell you. And people are like, I don't know, like if somebody sneaks in a pet, what am I going to do? People are going to sneak in pets. They just are. So guess what? Just make your place pet friendly so that there's no risk of like sneaking them in. I think you just have to think through how people are going to use the place. No one is ever going to treat the home as nicely as you want it to. But I mean, my thought is when I see the payouts get deposited, I don't really care. Like, whatever, it's not my place anymore, And yeah, I mean, you don't want it to be trash. There is some guest screening and precautions you can take. You'll start to learn red flags of who to host and who to decline as you do this longer and longer. But you have to just be, if that stuff makes you uncomfortable, this just isn't the business for you. And I will say this too. I actually think that there's a huge misconception that short-term rentals get trashed more than long-term rentals. I think that is the biggest myth that's out there. To me, there's nothing scarier than signing over a year-long lease, a 2-year-long lease, not ever seeing what the property looks like. And then you come in and you find out that the people you hosted had 3 cats who peed all over the carpets. They were smoking and it's baked into the walls. They cooked fish every single night and the fish oil splashed all over your range, and now you can't get the scent out. That is so terrifying to me. Short-term rentals, the longest my guest will be there is a week. It's like 2 to 7 days on average. And every single time we get in there and we have to restore it to look exactly like the pictures that we're marketing, because the next guest is coming usually the same day. So even if there is some damages and stuff that happens, I would way rather have eyes on the property every 2 to 7 days than just turn away the keys and have no idea what I'm walking into. How many long-term landlords have you heard are like, oh, after this tenant moved out, we dropped $20,000, like remodeling the whole entire kitchen because it was just wrecked. You're not going to have to, you might need to like change up wallpaper or some new art to keep the place looking fresh and trendy, but you're not going to have to be remodeling the entire listing by any means. Nobody's going to do that much damage to it.
That
if they
is,
do, there's insurance for that,
I so agree with you. Like, I have had long-term rentals, and like it is horrifying to go in there like after they move out. And then like a lot of times like it becomes way more emotional with long-term tenants. Like I have this property that's like a luxury property that we've been renting to like long-term tenants for like $9,500 a month. I cannot tell you how many times I've had people be like, oh, I'm having like a hard time like coming up with like rent payment this month. And you're like, I was trying to avoid this by buying this like high-end property, but like it doesn't discriminate. Like people like, and I love short-term rental because you literally get paid on check-in. And if there's a problem with payment, guess what? You have like these massive organizations behind you that are willing to help you. And something that I found too is like, I am such a baby as a host. Like anytime there's a problem, I just call Airbnb customer service and I'm like, hey, like I had this like thing happen. Whereas like with my long-term rental, I have nobody to call. Like I just have to figure it out. Whereas Airbnb, they'll be like, oh, like tell me what happened. Oh, we're so sorry about that. We'll try to like be the liaison between you and the guest, or like we'll just pay for it. Like I've literally had them give me like an ozone machine because I complained that a guest smoked pot. in my house, and I didn't even expect them to actually do anything. And they were like, "It's okay, honey. Like, here's $500 so you can get the smoke out." And I'm like, this is the best real estate investing ever.
Yes. Yes, I agree. And if you really have a problem guest, again, they're gone in 3 days. You report them to the app, you ban them, you say, I never want to host them again, and you never have to see them again. If you sign a 2-year long lease, the eviction process of getting people out like that is so daunting. Then, I mean, I'm in California. Anybody who stays longer than 30 days has squatters' rights that kick in, and they don't have to leave and they don't have to pay. That is so much riskier to me than letting people come for vacation every 3 days.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, speaking of problem guests, do you have any stories where you're like, this was the worst guest I've ever hosted, either in a personal property of yours or a co-hosted property? Like, how long have you been doing this now?
7 years. December will be 7 years.
7 years. Okay. So over the last 7 years, what have been some of your notable worst guests?
So, the worst ones are honestly just people who don't check out on time and trash the place. And in the moment, it's hard and you're so frustrated and you have to pay your cleaner extra and then try to go through and get reimbursed for it. It is a headache for sure. But when I look back, I'm like, those are the worst experiences, like cleaning up an extra mess, vacuuming some extra dog hair, people bringing in a pet and not paying the pet fee. Like those are the worst, really. So overall, I think it's not that bad. The craziest guest story I ever had was there was actually a guest who got arrested while staying at my place. Him and he came with his boyfriend or something, and they got in this huge fight. They started chasing each other naked around the condo complex, and one of the neighbors called the cops on them. When the cops came and tried to get his ID, they found that he was using a stolen ID and he had stolen credit cards. And they found that there was a warrant out for his arrest from 3 different states. So immediately they booked him. And then the boyfriend called me and was like, hey, I just want to let you know, the guy who booked your place just got arrested. I'm just going to go home. So I know that, our checkout wasn't for 2 more days, but you can go in and clean the place we're gone. And they left it perfectly clean. So
did he ask for a refund?
My craziest experience. No, they never asked for a refund. I never heard from the guy who booked. It was so bizarre, but yeah, I mean, that was the craziest experience, and they left it clean and tidy. So, you get these weird stories. For me, honestly, the worst guests are the ones I'm sure you've had. There are just certain people that you're just walking on eggshells the whole time that they're there. It's like, hi, we just wanted you to know it's not a big deal, but we checked in and we saw a little bit of dust underneath the bed frame. Not a big deal. You don't need to send a cleaner, but we just wanted to let you know. And then an hour later, it's like, hey, we just wanted to let you know the towels smell a little bit musty. It's really not a big deal, but we just wanted to let you know. Those to me are the worst. Even though they're polite, I'm like, what do you want from me? Do you want a refund? Do you want the cleaner? Are you going to hit me with a 1-star review? Just tell me what you want. These mind games that people play, really, I get a pit in my stomach with those kind of guests. But that's the worst of it, And then you laugh about it later.
I agree. That is the worst of it. I've had a few people that are sending me pictures of places that I've never looked at, whether it's my mechanical closet or a crumb. And I'm just wow, this is such a crazy way to spend your vacation. But, there's a small percentage of people who are like that. And I think the people that I see struggle a lot in this space is their own hosts or as co-hosts or people who they don't have thick skin. I've had some clients where they'll purchase a property and they're so perfectionistic and it's just so devastating to them because they do such a great job of setting up this beautiful stay. And there are some people that you're just not going to be able to please. And that's probably 1% of the population who is just anal. And no matter how great your stay is, they're still going to have something to complain about. And I think that the best is just to have some space for them and just know that they exist and then, deal with them, but not let it ruin your whole experience.
Completely true. Yeah. Even for with co-hosting, I work with so many different owners and, most of them are oh, damn, sucks to see pictures of this, but okay, how much extra do we owe the cleaner? Can we try and get it refunded? Thanks. That's most of them. I've had owners that I've co-hosted for that are like, I don't know, should we just pull my listing? It's just not even worth it. Can we raise the rate because I just don't want to be inviting guests like this? And like some people, it's a real struggle, and it's like a lot of talking them off the ledge, and just like, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna clean it up. It's gonna be fine. But yeah, you have to stomach some things to survive.
For sure. And then for you, like in building this co-hosting business, are you particular about like who you work with? Like, do you have any advice for people who are like, okay, I would love to get into co-hosting? Like, what are some things that, maybe newbies should be aware of and avoid?
I do. When I first started, I did not have any standards. It was like, great, anyone who wants to hire me and give me commission, right on. But I very quickly learned like who I like to work with. And I'm very picky right now. There is no amount of money that I could get from a certain property. If I feel like that owner is going to drive me nuts, forget it. I absolutely don't want to deal with them. We actually just had an owner who, she was with us for a couple years, and she was renting her property behind our back, which our contract specifically says you cannot do, because she took like the listing photos we invested in, and us stocking the units, designing it, optimizing everything. And then she was blocking off dates saying it was for her friends to come. And then we found out she was like renting it to people and like having them pay on like Venmo. So we hit her with a bill, and we were like, you need to reimburse us for this. Like, our contract says no renting outside. So she never paid us, but she ended up like terminating the contract. And then after 4 months, she just called me a couple weeks ago and was like, hey, I want to come back. I'm not making as much money with my new manager. And it was like, well, do you want to reimburse us for all the rentals that you did? No. Okay. Like, sorry. So, it's like, I don't know. I think a lot of people would be like, oh, well, let me just call that a wash and like take her back, because we're heading into winter's coming up and that's our peak season. Like, maybe I should just, take her back. But for me, like, that trust was broken. She didn't value our contribution for optimizing her listing and everything, like managing, handling all the cleanings, everything. We were still handling cleanings because she was like, oh, my friends just checked out. And we're like, well, we have to make sure the cleaner's in there because the next booking is a rental. So we were still managing everything, but she was just collecting the rent behind her back. So you do have to have standards and set some expectations. Personality wise, I think it's really about, you kind of want like the Goldilocks. So you don't want the owner that micromanages too much. But you also don't want the owner that's not responsive at all, because there are times where I'm like, hey, garbage disposal's broken. I need you to approve a $500 repair. Like, we have to get this done. And I've had owners who just don't respond, and they're like, I'm out of the country, sorry. So that's not good either. So you really want to find that Goldilocks, like just right amount of intervention. But yeah, I think that this is a really, really important thing you're touching on. Like, it has to be a good fit. Most co-hosts I know who have gotten burned out and quit co-hosting, I've actually never heard a co-host say that they quit because of guests, because like Airbnb was hard. It's always because the owners were hard. So that's the number one thing, is like to make sure that that's a good relationship. That's who you're going to work with the most closely. Guests are gone after 3 days. That owner, you're giving them weekly reports. If there's questions, you're texting them. That's a constant relationship. So it has to be a good fit.
Yeah, I think that is so true, that it is not typically the guests, that it is typically the owners that really burn co-hosts out. That's super interesting. Today I feel like people are more sensitive than ever on like their profit and like their margin, and like probably, and I'm seeing this too, like people just expect like a high level of like quality when it comes to like their partners with like co-hosts or property managers, or, whatever. In my industry too, like they're real estate professionals. What do you think people are looking for when they're looking for a co-host? Like, what problems are these customers like really trying to solve, and what are their expectations that you're kind of seeing across the board for their co-host?
Different owners have different priorities, or like different reasons they would hire a co-host. And I think it's really important, if anyone listening is interested in co-hosting, you have to be a good listener to the potential owner's objections. Some owners, it's going to be their biggest fear is like time. I want to be a passive investor. I don't want to deal with this. Just take it off of my plate. That's a very different pitch. If you're talking to that person, you don't want to bring up in the conversation like, oh, we're going to make sure that there's no damages to your property. Because if they weren't even thinking about that, now they're like, wait, what? Somebody might throw a party. Like, you really want to listen to what the objections are. Then I've had other owners who their biggest concern is damages to the property. And they're like, I just don't know how to make sure to screen guests properly. I don't know how to check for red flags. I don't want to be the one that has to call Airbnb and fight, for resolution claims if there are damages. So that's why they want to co-host. That's a very different conversation than just the person who wants passive income deposited every month. You'll also have people who want to maximize revenue and they want a co-host who knows pricing strategies and knows how to optimize a listing, knows what's competitive in the area. That's a really good client to have because they're going to make sure that they're not blocking dates or anything. They're willing to reinvest into the property to keep it competitive and booking. Did I answer your question? I guess it just kind of depends. I've seen different objections from different types of owners. Actually, I do have, if anyone wants, I have a freebie download. If you go to hostwithnatalie.com/co-host, I actually have a freebie download and it's the 6 most common objections I hear from owners and how to my like exact co-hosting script for how I counter those 6 objections. So that's a freebie you can download. And that kind of walks you through like the 6 most common things I hear.
I love that. And we'll link that in the show notes too. I like that you said that, a good client is actually the one who does want to optimize like their revenue, because I've seen a lot of property managers or co-hosts be really intimidated by that because they're like, well, they're just concerned with their bottom line and, my fee is this. But you're right. Like those people are probably more willing to listen to like the things that they need to do to get their listing to be a top performer, whether that's like design or amenities that need to be added. And then on top of that, they're not blocking off those days. And so it's interesting that you said that that's like an ideal client, because I've seen a lot of people want to shy away from those because they're like, oh, well, they're never going to pay me my fee.
That is so not true. And one thing I would really challenge you to say to those types of owners is, or like change your mindset that you're like, I'm not coming in and taking 20% of your earnings. My job is to come in and make you an additional 20%. I want to completely cover my cost with the strategies I bring in, and you don't have to lift a finger. So you're going to make the same amount, but without having to do any work. And that extra difference that I bring in from my strategies is covering my fee. That's like really what I want people to think about in this realm. But those are the clients truly that like, if something breaks, if there's whatever, if they advertise a Tesla supercharger as part of their amenities and your cleaner tells you it's broken and you're like, hey, the next guest is checking in, we need to get this fixed. That is the owner that's going to help you and pick up the phone and sign the check and make sure that gets repaired. The hosts that are just like, oh, I inherited this property and I don't want to do this. My grandma left this for us and I don't know what it could make, $600 a month. Sweet. They're like, they're not going to pick up the phone. They're not going to do anything. It might be, I guess, an easier client to please, but is that really who you want to work for? And just be like making scraps that they're not even happy with. And then they're going to come in and block an entire month over summer and be like, we're bringing our whole family. Sorry, I don't care. It's peak season. Like, go for the investors. It's maybe more of a challenge, but it's so much more rewarding to work with a partner like that.
Yeah, that is so true. And then on top of that, like if you're really optimizing a listing and you're making a percentage, like that's a greater use of your time, because now you're, working with a highly profitable like property, like higher gross revenue. And so you can make more per purchase. I love that you said that, like coming into it and saying like, I'm going to pay for myself. Like I'm going to provide so much value, like with I don't know how much you've been following, but like the NAR settlement and stuff, like in the real estate world, like I know that there's a lot of realtors who listen to this podcast too. Like now all of a sudden we're having to have conversations with our buyers where it's like, hey, before seller was always paying like buyer's agent's commission, but now like they're not obligated to pay. And like I'm seeing a lot of people be like, oh, like this is horrible. Like I'm going to be making less. as opposed to having that confidence of like, I'm going to be able to like get you a better deal than my commission. And like, I'm going to make sure that you net like far more and get like a far better property than what my commission amount actually is. And I think that if you're sincere in providing value in that way, your customers are going to love it. And you're not going to have an issue getting people to sign because people want value. They don't necessarily want like the cheapest service. They want it to make sense.
Totally. I don't think anybody out there is actually wants the cheapest service. Like people who say that don't understand. They want the job done. And if it's done, I mean, think about even like, let's go super simple with like Airbnb cleaning fees. You might think that you want the cheaper cleaner, but if the cheaper cleaner let's say you're paying $60 for this super cheap cleaner, but you're almost refunding a $60 cleaning fee to almost every single guest. You're now spending basically $120 in your cleaning fees, and you're getting bad reviews, less repeat bookings, lower nightly rate. Or you could just pay the cleaner $120 and just know that the quality is done. Like I think the people who think that they want a cheaper service they're not like connecting the dots. How much more would you rather have just the peace of mind of getting the cleaner in there who's going to check everything, gets you 5-star reviews, makes you a guest favorite, makes you a super host, and then lets you continue getting more repeat bookings at higher prices and not have the headache of refunding? Everybody would pick that if it was like spelled out for them like that. So yeah, you have to do the same thing as a co-host, as a realtor with your commissions, and just kind of prove that value.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important right now, especially as, people are struggling a bit more and like more concerned about their bottom line, is just like really explaining like, here are the investments that are going to impact your bottom line positively, even though it might feel like a bigger investment up front. Well, for people who are wanting to like explore like becoming a host or a co-host, like where can they find more resources from you? What programs do you currently have like running?
So I have 2 courses available. My full scale, like comprehensive mentorship that walks you through everything I've built and buying properties, finding markets, all of that is called Host Like a Mother. And we are relaunching that October 7th. So that's coming out soon. And that has like coaching calls and everything, a lot of hand-holding included with it. If you are just interested in co-hosting specifically, I also have a fully self-guided program called the Co-hosting Crash Course. You could get through it in one weekend. And that's like kind of the promise with that course, is you could get through it in one weekend. Buy it on a Friday, get through it in the weekend, and sign your first client on Monday. Like it's very, very actionable. And by the end of 1 month, you could make the money back in that course. So that one is like really geared to just take action. There's no coaching or anything with that one, but videos and resources, contracts, onboarding checklists, like immediately you could jump in to your first co-hosting client. So for somebody who just wants to like get started right away, I would say that one. But if you want the full, the whole enchilada, like everything, all the hand holding, all the mentorship, me cheering you on, a place to vent and all of that, then I would go with Host Like a Mother. And you can find both of those if you just connect with me on Instagram at Natalie Palmer, or my website always has details too, hostwithnatalie.com.
That's awesome. And yeah, I love your story because I feel like you were working corporate, you started this as a side hustle, and then that side hustle like allowed you to invest in your own portfolio. And I can see like so many people want to do that. Like, maybe they dream of having their own investment property, but they just don't have like the funds necessary to start. And like, this is such a great way to like earn active income, maybe outside of your W-2, or maybe you are like in a season of motherhood. And this is something that like can fit into your life. So I highly suggest checking out Natalie's resources. Listen to her podcast. It's amazing. She's so like hilarious and real about all the things hosting. That's a No Vacancy Podcast, and we'll have it in the show notes. Natalie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chantal. You asked some really great questions. You're a fun interviewer. So thank you for having me.